You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get started with the show, a very exciting announcement. In fact, a thank you, a huge thank you to both Steve in Milwaukee and James in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Both of them donated to the podcast this week. We are so appreciative of those donations. Guys, we know you love the show, and we certainly love putting it on for you, but this stuff isn't 100% free. There are costs associated with keeping our website up and running and just generally keeping the podcast going each week. So we're so thankful and humbled by any donation that we get from you guys. Again, Steve in Milwaukee, James in La Crosse, Wisconsin, thank you guys so much for donating to the show. If you'd like to donate to the show, again, so appreciative, go to our website, hazardground.com, click on the donate button at the top right of the homepage. All the donations go into paying for the cost of putting out a new episode each week and making sure we're keeping up the quality of this show. Also, our Amazon promotion that we talk about each week, you go to our website, hazardground.com, click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage. We get a percentage of what you guys spend, and we donate that back to some of the charities featured here on the podcast. We were able to make another donation this week. This one to the Special Forces Foundation. Just an incredible foundation. If you guys would like to learn more about them, go to their website, specialforcesfoundation.org. This is an amazing charity that is taking care of some of America's best soldiers. So please, again, check out specialforcesfoundation.org and certainly keep the donations coming to us. Continue to grow that social media following. We are so close to reaching 1,000 followers on Instagram, so make sure you guys follow us there, on Twitter as well. Don't forget about our YouTube channel. This is huge. We are almost at 2,000 subscribers there. Love growing this audience. That link is youtube.com/C as in Charlie /Hazard Ground Podcast. Again, youtube.com/C/Hazard Ground Podcast. You can get all of our episodes on YouTube as well. And as always, we hope and continue that everybody out there is staying safe, staying healthy. We know these are crazy, tumultuous times in America right now. As veterans and service members, we ask that you guys keep setting the example, keep leading the way, and making sure that we are doing everything to uphold those values that make the military, the American military, the best on the planet. Now, with all that out of the way, let's get on to this week's episode. And joining us this week on the podcast is a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel who had 22 years of combined service. He had 4 deployments to Iraq, including one during Desert Storm, the other 3 after 9/11. He went to Harvard as well as graduating from West Point. He now is the founder and CEO of ScoutComms, an organization that works with businesses and helps out veterans. He is Fred Wellman joining us on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Fred, welcome, man. Thanks for being here.
That's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk.
Just an incredible journey for you. I mean, it's one of those tales where it sort of hits on every single note that we try to touch on in the podcast. Not only is it combat, but it is personal loss and tragedy, military loss, the return back to combat again. I mean, it's a whole spectrum of emotions for you.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. It's sometimes I'll sit down with somebody. Actually, I was drinking some bourbon Sunday night at a friend's house, and they got me going, and they're like, "Jesus, man!" Like, I was like, "Yeah, it's been a wild ride, but still here, still above ground. I guess that's what matters, right?"
And by the way, West Point and Harvard is no slouch on your resume, to say the least. I mean, it's not many.
Well, yeah, I've been pretty fortunate. It's kind of funny. I mean, my joke with West Point, I graduated in the top 2/3 of my class. So I was really an overachiever. 600, 900, but I did better later. Is when it was actually a funny story. General Petraeus' idea for me to even look at going to the Kennedy School. And we were in Iraq on my second tour, and I was like, I barely graduated West Point, right? He's like, yeah. You've approved. I'm like, okay. And I managed to get through it.
The other thing that's interesting is what's unique about you is you're actually one of the few people that I've even come across, let alone interviewed for the podcast, that went to Desert Storm and to the War on Terror. It seems there's this weird sort of timing that anybody who was in Desert Storm got out shortly thereafter and was not still in a post 9/11 era. You actually bridged that gap, which is pretty unique. Again, the way the Army sort of went, a lot of guys who were there for, the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, for whatever reason, either just got out there, time got up for 20 years, and a whole new influx. Because as we remember, and we haven't even gotten to your story, but historically, after the Gulf War, Clinton takes office, and he downsized the military incredibly to like under 200,000 of the active force.
It's easy to remember. It's easy to forget. We actually downsized them before Desert Storm. I remember it was at the end of the Cold War. We had a huge gap. They offered my West Point class early outs.
Really?
Yeah. So we had a number of guys already shedding when Desert Shield kicked in. One of my best friends from the military academy was actually out processed when the 82nd Airborne got mobilized, and he begged and went right to the division commander, said, "Dude, I got to go," and they pulled him back in, and he went off to Desert Storm with us. So we were in the process of downsizing, and then we came back, and it got smaller after the Cold War. So yeah, a lot of guys got out. I think my West Point class is one of the smallest ones as far as like the active duty as their careers progressed. I think we were down to like 1/3 of the guys still in by the time Iraq hit. So yeah, it is a little weird, but I was a young platoon leader for Desert Storm, and I was able to be I was a field grade for Iraq.
All right, well, let's get into your story. Start back and how and why you got to the academy.
First, there was a big bang. No, so I'm the son of a Marine, and so my dad was obsessed with the Marine Corps. He served in War II, and how that goes. They never let it go. And as I went through high school, I was very interested in the military. I wanted to be a pilot, actually. And as time came to pick a school, I had where everybody went was the University of Missouri. I grew up in outside of St. Louis, Missouri. And I remember actually going to look at the options. My dad dragged me over to meet the Air Force Academy guys, and they were like jerks, Air Force. and the West Point guys were over in the corner like, "Hey," and I went over and talk to them, and you could major whatever you wanted to. You go in the Army. Army has aircraft. Army has boats. Who knew, right? And I applied to the military academy and got in, of all things. And from Missouri, I was one of the first guys in my hometown to go in a long time. And it was great. Again, it was a military tradition. I often joke I actually got rejected from Marine Corps ROTC though. So it's
wow.
It really made my dad actually wrote a letter to the commandant because I got into West Point, but not the Marine Corps ROTC. But it's a great story when I talk to Marine audiences. But yeah, so got in the military academy in 1983, graduated in 1987 as an aviator. I got lucky. I studied hard my last year of eligibility and managed to jump in to get an aviation slot.
Yeah, because those aren't easy to come by. I mean, everybody's lusting after them because being a pilot is cool.
Yeah, well, the thing is, the smart guys study so much their eyes go bad, right? So, so you get to slip a couple of dumb guys in there. My eyes were closed 12 hours a day, generally speaking. So I didn't. I had really good vision when the smart guys didn't. And yeah, I slid into the aviation slot. Actually, literally the last slot in my class. I used to joke I was the dumbest West Pointer at flight school.
Really? Well, I kind of. I was in a platoon on active duty with a really dumb West Point kid, and it was always
we exist. Yeah.
I was always my reminder of that they're held in such high regard, and I was like, somebody's getting a C at West Point and barely getting by. It's just the bell curve of life.
Education doesn't mean intelligence sometimes.
Right, sure. Now, you were, as you mentioned, you got in 83, so we're in a relative, post-Vietnam era. We're in a time of peace. Did you think that you were going to do your 5-year service commitment and be done with it, or did you have plans at this point? Did you think you were going to be a career kind of guy?
I was always that guy that not quite fit in. I remember when I was at the first year of the military academy, I used to joke that I got through West Point by planning on quitting and then never getting around to it, right? It's like, well, next semester I'm out, right? And I remember I had a great senior cadet come to me when I was a freshman, or plebe we call it, and he says, "Look, man, actually, it was one of my majors." He said, "Look, you don't fit in here." I really didn't. And he goes, "But that's the great thing about the Army. The Army is big enough that you can have a career. You could even make lieutenant colonel someday." I was like, and never really fit in. That's the joy. You might not be a general. You may not be in May 06, but the Army is a big enough and diverse enough organization, unlike some of the other services, where you can be a bit of an outsider and have a successful career. So, and that really was, if you look at my career, and I think you've seen it is marked by a lot of weird stuff, right? So, and I was that guy. So I held that to so I made it through the military academy. I guess I wasn't a stellar cadet. I was truly 600 out of 900, but I was able to find my way into aviation and find a career where I was able to make it 20 years. But my plan was to do the 5. Matter of fact, I remember having a talk with my battalion commander. I was in the 24th Infantry Division, the heavy division, right, massive mechanized division, which was somehow assigned to the 18th Airborne Corps. Nobody understood it, And I remember scoffing at the idea I was going to get out. And he goes, we're never going to go to war. The mechanized division is never going to go. It's all about, remember that was when they were building the light divisions, light infantry, 7th ID, 25th ID was a light division. That was the big thing. We're going to fight in the jungles of Panama in the drug war. And, Colombia, that was the big thing we were thinking of in the everybody forgets late 80s and 90s. And then I swear to God, like 2 months later, poof, I'm boarding an airplane and a boat to head to Saudi Arabia for a massive mechanized fight, the largest since World War II.
So you talk about not fitting in. I say it all the time that the Army has a propensity of putting you where you're supposed to be, right? Whether you want to be there or not, it's uncanny how that happens.
Yeah.
As you're starting to go through the early part of your career, and like you said, you were thinking that there was never going to be a war, there's never going to be a combat. Did you feel like that you were in the right career? Or, did you feel like, just because you're an outsider, that this wasn't something that you could see yourself doing for an extended period of time?
It was mixed. I often say that I was very fortunate that at about 1 out of 3 bosses loved me. Yeah. Right. You know what I mean? And so I was fortunate to have some great mentors at key points in my career progression. You hit those key, that first, I had 3 platoons, which is unheard of now, but my class of West Pointers and my year group of officers had extended. We were like lieutenants for 6 years compared to like 4 now. That's a drawdown thing too from the Cold War. So I ended up having 3 Aero Scout platoons. I had a scout platoon in Korea. I had a scout platoon in the cavalry, and I had a scout platoon in the 1st and 24th Viper, the attack battalion, Apache battalion. That's the guys I took to Desert Storm with me. So I flew for my first 5 years. Had a staff gig, and then just some really cool opportunities. I went to the Armor Advanced course, and then I went to Ranger School as a mid-grade captain.
Wow.
Just bizarre as an aviator. And then because they keep changing their mind whether aviators can go to Ranger School or not. I had a window where they were allowing aviators to go, and somebody said, "Why don't you go, bro?" And I was I think I was the second oldest guy in my class at Ranger School at the time. And so I've had these kind of breaks, you know what I mean? That kind of kept me going. And I did have a break at service. I got out at 13 for a host of good reasons. Frankly, I actually mentioned President Clinton's impeachment in my resignation letter. To be honest, I was that guy, which is interesting considering my politics today. But I was working for General Tommy Franks at the time, and as one of his assistants, and I was his PowerPoint guy. And he was like, "Yeah, I was frustrated. I got out at 13. I did join the reserves there in Atlanta, where you were, and." Then they threw a war 2 years later.
Yeah. It sucks you back in.
It does that, doesn't it?
Before we get to that, let's go back to your time heading to Desert Storm. So, as the buildup of this thing is happening, we see that Saddam invades Kuwait and the world's starting to change. When do you get a first inkling that you might have to go into combat?
So we were 24th ID, so we were part of 18th Airborne Corps. So we were part of what they used to call the Rapid Deployment Force, which was the thing. We joked that we were going to be the last ones they sent, but because we're the heavy division. But I remember I just moved to a new apartment with my first wife Jennifer, and we just moved in together, and we were engaged but not married, and we didn't have TV. And I remember going to one of my fellow platooners was in the complex. I remember sitting on the floor. The wives were sitting on the couch talking. He and I watched the news about the invasion of Kuwait, and we're both like, "Dude, that's like all of our shit's sand colored." you notice that, right? All of our trucks are sand colored.
Right.
Yeah,
well, because people forget we painted everything green for Vietnam and left it that way.
Always tan. Yeah. 24th ID was tan, and we're like, "Damn, man, that's weird." And we just got back from NTC, so again, we had just gotten back, so. All those, as a young officer, there's some real coincidences here. They're going to call somebody. And sure enough, I remember we got the call about 2 a.m. and, hey, we're doing a deployment drill. And I get in, and my battalion commander, even Tom Stewart, I was the acting company commander at the time. He's like, "Yeah, it's just a drill. I'm going to go up to division. I got a meeting. You guys hang out. When we get back, we'll get some donuts." And he comes back like, eyes wide, pale. He's like, "Fellas, we're freaking deploying." I'm like, "What?" and we're like, "Holy shit!" And sure enough, within it all happened very quick. I actually married Jennifer. We said, "Hey," because back then there wasn't any support for girlfriends or fiancés,
right?
And so I say, we ran down to the courthouse and got married, which ended up being like national news somehow.
Really? Why?
because it's a funny story, classic story. We were out watching. So a big thing they were doing in Savannah was people would stand aside the road and watch us, all the trucks, convoys going to the port, because we were shipping out of Fort Stewart up into Savannah into the port. And we lived right on the highway on the way. So we were literally standing on the corner watching all the convoys go by with all of our equipment from Fort Stewart. And she and I are chit-chatting, and we start chit-chatting with this woman next to us who ended up being a reporter. And she's like, oh, wow, so you're going? I said, yeah. And she's like, what you guys? Oh, we just got married. She goes, what? You just got married? Like, yeah, yesterday. She's like, what? And she goes, oh, I'd love to tell that story. So we gave her some pictures from the courthouse wedding, and it's classic story media. You know how it goes. They put it in the local paper. The AP picked it up. Soldiers Magazine picked it up.
Wow.
Today Show picked. Yeah, just you know how that goes.
Now, did you guys get married just because there was extra benefits for married people when you deploy?
To me, it was her being a part of the family resource group.
Gotcha. Okay.
It was like information flow. I knew that, especially in the old days, again, girlfriends didn't count. So they'd be calling my mom and dad. They wouldn't be calling the woman I lived with. So we said, we were engaged anyway. So let's just get married, be done with it. And so we got married in the courthouse real quick.
By the way, I forgot to ask you. You know, you mentioned you went to flight school. How did you pick which helicopter you wanted?
So I knew, the first day of I arrived at Fort Rucker, end up in a roommate with a guy, just literally ran into it in processing, and random strangers we all ended up living together. And we're driving to work, and our first day on base for officers base, of course. And at Fort Rucker, there's Guthrie Army Airfield right there on Fort Rucker. And there was an active duty at the time. There was an active duty attack battalion there then, Apache battalion. For whatever reason, it was stationed there. I think it belonged to 18 Corps, as a matter of fact. So we're driving on post, and I look over, and I see the Chinooks, I see the Blackhawks, I see the Apaches, and then there's this little OH-58. If you remember the little tiny OH-58s, the old school, not the Deltas. I'm talking Charlie model, Bell Jet Ranger, 1 foot off the ground skid, the sexy little thing, real sexy little angles, tiny aircraft. And I said to my buddy, I said, I feel stupid. What aircraft is that? And I didn't even know. He's like, oh, that's OH-58 Scout. I said, oh. He goes, you know what? It's a single pilot aircraft, but it's got 2 seats. I mean, you know what the second seat is for? He goes, I said, no. He goes, well, the first seat's for the pilot, and the second seat's for his balls. I'm like, oh,
wow.
I'm flying that, that sounds like my kind of mission, right? And I start reading, like, yeah, Scout, unarmed aircraft, flying in it. And back in those days, we would fly in unarmed ahead of the Apaches. We didn't actually fly in formation with them. We went in ahead of them. And I was like, that's kind of a cooking sexy little mission. You scoot and shoot. And right. And I loved it. And I loved being a Scout pilot. I mean, it's the old 58 Charlies where you strap that bird on. And then I got to fly in Korea. I got to fly in the desert. I got to fly in JRTC. I mean, it's just a great aircraft. And again, I had been flying for 5 years by the time I went to war. So we were pretty good at what we did with those little Scout birds. But yeah, just what a great aircraft. All
right. So fast forward. Right. You guys are deploying forward to Kuwait, or Saudi Arabia, I should say. Saudi Arabia. You get there. Do you know what your mission is when you land on ground?
So we get there, and 24th ID's job, if you remember the history of it, was actually because at that point we thought Saddam was going to invade Saudi Arabia as well. So our first mission was to defend Saudi Arabia. So we set the 24th ID up on the corridors from the border of Kuwait down into the oil field section of Saudi Arabia. So we had a weird deal. Our boat broke down on the way over. Our roll-on ship actually broke down.
Boy, so that's got to suck.
Oh, it was a mess, man. So we ended up with a whole Apache battalion of troops and pilots and shit. There was this cement factory they put us in. It was a disaster. It was like a refugee camp. And so we spent about 3 weeks there waiting for our stuff to arrive. We actually had to send guys to Spain to offload the ship onto another one. Finally, our stuff arrived. We deployed. General McCaffrey wanted the 24th in the desert, everybody. So where other Apache units, other helicopter units deployed like airfields all over the region, we actually went out into the desert and set up our fob. We didn't call them fobs then, in the middle of nowhere. We spent 4 months fighting the dust, trying to keep our aircraft. I mean, every little trick you can, from pouring oil directly on there. And then they gave us this weird like concrete thing that would actually make the sand hard, but that only lasted a few flights, and you'd start turning to dust again. And eventually they built us like metal pads out in the middle of the desert. But we stayed in the desert. That was one of the weird things about 24th. But it made us a little bit more resilient as far as our ability to operate. And then we just trained. So we spent 4 or 5 months just flying our asses off, doing battle drills, preparing, figuring out what the defense, if it did come down that corridor.
Well, that was the time of Desert Shield before we officially turned into Desert Storm.
Right.
So do you get a sense throughout Desert Shield, are you sitting there thinking that, this is never going to happen? I don't know what the hell we're doing here. We're kind of wasting our time feeling?
Well, we knew something was up when everybody kept coming, right? When we first got there at the 82nd, it was funny. I remember running in 82nd guys, like the DFAC that we were using at one of the Air Force, at the Air Force, King Khalid Air Force Base, KKF. And it was funny. The 82nd guy was like, well, glad you heavy fuckers are here. We're leaving. I'm like, nah, bro, I don't think you are. We're the Rapid Deployment Force. Our job is to be ready for the big one. I'm like, I think this is it, bro. And I remember sitting there. I'm just lieutenant. It was another lieutenant. I'm like, I hear you, man. I'm not sure what you think is going on here. I think this actually may be the reason you exist. And that was a clue. They didn't leave, right? They stayed. I mean, and then more folks keep coming. Then they brought in Europe. So we knew we were building up to something. That was obvious. So we kind of had a feeling what it was going to be early on. So I just trained my guys. We trained and flew. I mean, we were flying constantly, keeping those aircraft up, doing services in the desert. It was amazing. We built just a tent up around the aircraft and service it, and then tear the tent down. It was quite a time, but yeah, as it got closer and closer, it was obvious. Then we got the orders pretty early.
What do you remember about hearing, hey, we're going forward into Iraq or into Kuwait?
I can remember sitting around. We got the op order. I remember going back. I had a great company commander named Doug Gurman, who I'm still in touch with, and I remember he had gotten a big package for his birthday. Vienna sausages and all that stuff. And I remember sitting in his little tent, just going, okay, this is it. We're going to war. We're going to be war. It was kind of funny. I remember literally having a discussion. I was like, wow, we're going to be combat veterans. and you know how it was at that point. We'd had Panama, we'd had, Grenada, but there really wasn't a lot of big fights in my career at that point, even going back to the 70s. So it was really interesting. We kind of knew there's just one of the wonderful things about serving, and I think you experienced it, is you're in a moment in history, it. There's just times you're sitting there and you're like, wow, there's gonna be books written about this someday. I'm sitting here, and I think I always had a sense. That's one of the things I loved about the service, and throughout my career ended up being that way. It's like, wow, I'm sitting here, and that's what we sensed. We were highly confident. I had a great team of crews, and the Apache guys and Doug was a great trainer. I mean, we were ready. I mean, that was the best feeling, was knowing you're going into combat as absolutely ready as you can be. And that's a rare feeling, I think. And I was very fortunate to have that.
All right. So people need to kind of get the background of what happens for you in Desert Storm, and take me through sort of, what happens, for your unit and the guys that you're in charge of, as far as, the first mission. Is it the first mission you guys have?
It was one of the first. It was the first actual combat mission we had done. So what happened was, as the division moved up to the border for the invasion, they made the decision that 24th ID would be the big left hook. So we went up north and then cut left down the Route 7. I think it was Route 7. I forget. And so we were set up to the left of Kuwait, basically at the bottom of Iraq. Immediately, as we were setting up security, we started doing patrols on the border to make sure the Iraqis didn't know we were there. There was a lot of radio silence. But what frustrations, we started having a lot of frustration early on. For example, the maps they gave us were literally black and white printouts. We were given photocopies of actual maps to use. That was nuts. And then as the air war opens up, that's when we moved up. And I think General McCaffrey, I don't want to speak for him, but my understanding for him was he was getting frustrated about what the attack routes, that there was 3 corridors we'd be flying into Iraq, what they really looked like. It wasn't just open desert, contrary to popular belief. There was a lot of terrain down there, wadis and all that sort of thing. And so as the air war developed, we were training a little bit, but immediately we ran into a lot of problems there. One, it was dusty as all hell. It was fresh desert. A lot of these wadis were just powder, like talcum powder. So when you land a couple of times, all of a sudden you're just dusting out every time you take off. And it was pitch black. I mean, there was nothing out there. It was just desert and darkness. And we're flying just good time, old style NVGs, Series 4 NVGs in the the 58s. The Apache guys had FLIR, but we had just, which didn't always help too, but we at least, all we had was NVG. So you're out in this pitch black, and as we approached the invasion date of the ground war, we had a couple of events. So I had one mission where we got called out in the middle of the night because there was a report of Iraqis bumping onto us on the border. I took off middle of the night with an Apache team, followed the Apaches up to where this was going on, landed, I ended up running into one of my West Point classmates of all things on the ground. And basically they said, we have a standoff. They're looking at us. We're looking at them. We're getting ready to open fire. Can you confirm the target? I get up in the aircraft. The Apache's like, yeah, don't let anybody shoot. It's our own people looking at each other. I mean, there's like a standoff between, sister units looking at each other. And luckily, and then the funny thing, not funny in retrospect, was they're like, hey, Fred, Lieutenant Wellman, go report to the assistant division commander and his little talk there and back brief him. No, that's great. Where's that? Literally, I got a black and white map, right? I had no GPS. I had, time distance heading. Luckily, the Apache's like, hey, we'll lead you there because they had the Loring with GPS, what it was then. They lead me to the tent. I land. It's pitch ass black. I remember briefing the division commander, the 1-star, going, "Yeah, sir, we were like over here, like big hand wave,
somewhere in this area right here.
All of Saudi Arabia, But the point, and I took off, and getting back, it was really dark. I was flying with an E4, great kid named Chris Anderson, and we had a list of air observers then. It wasn't actually another pilot. I was the only pilot in the aircraft, and it was treacherous, man. I remember trying to land in one of my pilots, who you'll hear more, CO2, Hal Reichel. It literally came down my landing spot with 2 flashlights and laid on the ground so I could see my landing pad. It was so dark. And I landed basically on Hal's head, basically to try and land. And so we were really, Chris and I were, of the 3 crews, we were the most junior of, even with all my flying experience, we were still the most junior crew of my 3 scouts. So flash forward the next couple of days, we get word the division wants to do some route recons of the division attack routes. Again, the way we flew was the scouts lead and then the Apaches follow, or scouts fly in the Apache formation with them. But we were the navigators. We were the scouts. That was our job. Back then, the Apaches were not trained in scouting. Their job was to fly up to a target, blow it up, and fly out. Our job was everything else. It's different now, but then it was. So the first night they did it, we fought tooth and nail. They insisted on only having Apaches go. And so the Apaches went in the first night, and it was not great. I mean, they did go off route. They ended up getting some crap. So we staged a little intervention with the battalion commander. Said, look, we want to send scouts in the next mission. You got to let us go. And he relented. Said, all right, you can scan a scout weapons team. So 1 scout, 2 Apaches, 2 of them for tonight's mission. And so I was feeling victorious. But I get back, and my 2 crews came to me and said, look, sir, I know you want to go. You're the platoon leader, but you're the most junior. You already had one challenging night. Chris and I blacked out one night, almost crashed the aircraft. You need to stay home. Like, and their reason was sound as a safe crew with the crew mix. I mean, they were the 2 more senior, so I actually.
But did you feel, even though you're the most junior, did you feel the mission was something you couldn't handle?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Obviously, it's just. But with only 2 out of 3 crews going, you want to send your best. And we were being watched. I mean, it was a big test for the scouts. So I wanted to have my best team forward. So I sat down with the company commander, and he agreed. He goes, yeah, you should sit this one out. Let Hal go. Let Dennis Midgley go, who was my instructor pilot, actually. And so we sent out of the 2 we sent the 2 senior warrant officer crews. And I sat the thing out back at the battalion headquarters. So there we are. They launched the mission. I'm sitting back in the fob and monitoring in the battalion headquarters. And at some point, the crews got into Iraq, and as near as we could tell, they hit some fog layers. And they came back across. They aborted the mission and came back. And Hal and Mike didn't come back. My air crew, my CO2 Hal Reichel and specialist Mike Daniels. Aircraft just didn't come back. They had separated from the flight. They called their hitting weather. The procedure should be climb. You climb out and you take risks of getting shot down. But because we used to say, and the ground has a kill ratio of 1.0, right? When you hit the ground, you're always going to die. If you climb up, maybe a missile will hit you, maybe it won't. So it's air is always better. 2 things you always want when you're flying any aircraft: airspeed, velocity, and altitude. Airspeed, velocity, altitude, right? So you want speed. You want speed and air. So the 2 things, the 2 life-saving things you always get is more speed, more altitude. And so that was the procedure. So in theory, they should have climbed out, turned around, flew back to Saudi Arabia. But they never showed up. And so after a long sleepless night, we took the battalion commander took a decision to send in broad daylight a whole company of Apaches in to fly the same route with Blackhawks. And they found Hal and Mike about 30 or 40 Ks into Iraq, where they had apparently flown straight into the ground about 90 knots, and the aircraft had flipped 6 times, killing them instantly.
Wow.
So
now, could you tell that from the crash? Or you got all the information after the fact?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was pretty obvious what happens. They had at some point they had just, I can't criticize. I mean, what you do, you look at the map, you look down at the map for a second. It's easy to do when you're flying at 90 knots. 6-10 feet off the ground. It's a split second. All it takes is 1 second, and all of a sudden you're on the ground. And So it was up. That was basically 1/3 of my combat power. I lost, one of my aircraft of 3. I lost 2 key members of our team, and it was tough. I mean, the division only lost 8 people. 24th ID only lost 8 people from the actual division. So,
I mean, I asked the question so I don't know the answer, but how much do you blame yourself?
For many years, it's that was when. I've been very open. I think if you follow me on social media, I'm very open about my struggles with PTSD and survivor's guilt. It was such a weird time. I mean, the 90s was weird. It wasn't. It's bad now, but I mean, Jesus, man, we did. Hal and Mike got killed. We did a memorial service the next day. I got called out of their memorial service for another mission. I literally did the whole, Battle of Britain, run and grab your gear and jump your helicopter thing. We were doing that a lot for every little Iraqi tank that bumped up to the border. And then we invaded a couple days later, and then, that was it. And then I was home. I mean, 24th ID did all the way to the big left hook, and then I was home. I was home 3 weeks after they died.
But I mean, do you ever get a chance to process the grief?
No, at that point we didn't, it was, and that was
not even after you had gotten home.
No, you were supposed to be normal when you got home. I mean, nobody talked about it. We got home, and went back to work. I mean, everybody did. It was in the 90s. We didn't talk about, I don't remember literally. I don't think we had I don't remember, at least. I could be wrong. My memory is weird. You know how it goes. Yeah. I don't remember a memorial service for them when we got home. I think there was some minor memorial service for the division guys, but no, we went right back to business as normal. I mean, you just didn't talk about it.
That mission you went out on after the memorial service, obviously there's anger, right, that you want to unleash.
Oh yeah.
And so you do that. And let me phrase the question this way: was that done carelessly or recklessly?
No, we were real pro, but we had a mission. So the 24D, by the time we flew into Iraq during the invasion, we made our way almost to. Forgive me. It was right there on the highway in the middle there. It's Talil. Talil's the airbase. And so that was our first big firefight was up at Talil Air Base, pretty far up near Route 1 at the Baghdad to Basra Highway. And then our biggest combat mission came that day. McCaffrey called us out because they'd seen organized units on the highway there. So I took my scouts and my Apaches up north and attacked from the south. And we were relentless. I mean, we just rolled down that highway, killing everything in our way. I remember, they were hiding under bridges. We were lancing hellfires underneath bridges. I actually almost ran out of fuel because I was, they had my air scout, Chris was like, he used to have a pointer. He'd like extend his pointer, like tap on the gas gauge. Like, we're running out of fuel, I mean, literally I'm like, all right, God damn it, we're done. We're going back. We killed it. We were relentless. I mean, it was ruthless. And then, and we went back, and that mission was unbelievable. And then the big one was the big final fight where we were just unleashed hell on those guys.
When you look back on that, do you feel like any of it was irresponsible to a certain extent?
No.
Okay.
I don't. I really don't. I go back to Doug Gurman. It's funny. It really is a study in leadership in many ways. Tom Stewart, the battalion commander, Doug, and McCaffrey too. I'll give him credit. But especially like my company commander, Doug Gurman, who retired as lieutenant colonel as well. Doug was such a pro. He good old boy from Arkansas, but I think he's West Point grad too. But Doug was so good at getting us back on task. Like this happened, but we have a mission and we're professionals. And I had honestly one of the finest fighting forces I ever was part of. That company, Alpha Company, first 24th Aviation. They were just now we were relentless and we were ruthless, and we didn't go home with much ammo on our wings every time. Like we emptied those aircraft out and we did our business. But I don't think we were ever excessive, and we never did anything. You know what I'm saying? But
sure.
I mean, I saw some horrible stuff. That last fight at the Hammurabi Division, the famous Causeway battle, that was the day after the ceasefire. Hammurabi Republican Guard bumped into the 24th ID, started a firefight. General McCaffrey decided to show them what a mistake that was. We found lines and lines of tanks and personnel carriers lined up to cross a single bridge, and we rolled 3 Apache companies in on them, one after another. You can turn on the military channel right now and you'll see video footage. It's famous. You probably see all the times where the Apaches lasing the target, boom, next target, boom, next target, boom.
Right. We
had the whole process where we had one Apache lasing everything and we just shoot their missiles to them, and it was just marching them down. It was something to see. But
all right. So you end up getting back.
yeah,
And by the way, just pause it. Packing all those emotions away in a box that you're not supposed to open for many years, theoretically.
yeah, that's the third.
And I put that on pause because, well, reality hits you personally, as does tragedy, after you get back. And, I can't imagine how you stack what happens next on what you've already been through.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So yeah, I went home. Jennifer and I got properly married in the court at the church. Ended up getting I got with the advanced course at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and then assigned to the 101st Airborne after Ranger School. Get the 101st Airborne. Jennifer gets pregnant finally, and she's 7.5 months pregnant. And I'm a company commander for a headquarters company in Apache Battalion. And Jen goes down to Nashville to run some errands, and when she comes back. Unfortunately, she was in a terrible car accident. Her vehicle was T-boned, and she was killed instantly in a car crash. So I was 29 years old, sitting in a training meeting when my wife got killed and my baby got killed. So, yeah, it was pretty brutal, especially, it was like a double tap, within 3 years of each other, basically. It was less than 3 years.
Did you allow yourself grief this time around? Because, we find out because we become almost robotic at times when it comes to grief, right? Because it's what we're trained. So you're able to pack away the first set of grief. Did that same sort of thing happen after your wife was killed?
So I was a company commander, as I mentioned, the 101st Airborne.
Right.
Also have a deployment unit. So Jennifer got killed, and the baby got killed. I took leave, put them in the ground, and everything I had to do. They were from New York. I went to New York. I got back to try and get my personal affairs in order, and just about 10 days after she died, Saddam massed his troops on the Kuwaiti border again. People forget that in October of '94. And President Clinton at the time said, hey, we're not going to put up with that. So they mobilized with great fanfare the 101st Airborne and took all 3 Apache battalions and put us on airplanes to fly to Kuwait. And so we weren't even on a training. We were in a training cycle. We weren't even deployable at the time. But they said, no, you're deploying. So I actually came off leave some 10 days after my wife died to pack up my company and take them to Kuwait. And so so here I worked that, and then we had a brand new battalion commander. He took command the day after my wife was killed. And he's like, oh, but we got to train, so let's go to the field instead if we're not going to deploy. So I ended up working 30 straight days without a day off after my wife was killed.
So essentially you didn't even have time to grieve.
No. And then there was just a weird deal. I won't besmirch someone. He's out there still. I know he works in the defense industry now, but that colonel was not a kind person. And so he made some very key decisions that actually ended up causing me a lot of grief later, but not letting me take leave. He actually belittled my grief. And so it was pretty bad. And so we lasted about 3 months, and then I was coming apart at the seams at that point, not sleeping, a lot of challenge. I had a great first sergeant who kind of kept me out of trouble when he found me sleeping in my car. Cause I came to work at 3 a.m. Or didn't go home. And so, came to a the Army's a funny bird, right? The Army can damage you, and the Army can take care of you, right? So about Christmas time, I was coming apart. She got killed in September. At Christmas, pretty much all bets are off as far as my mental health. It was just a train wreck, and the decision was made to let me PCS out of there. So I actually PCS'd to Hawaii.
Are you able to understand what you're going through at this moment, or are you in so much grief that you can't even process, day-to-day actions and motions and anything else?
It's a bit of a blur. I think at that point it was a bit of a blur. I think I tried to do the work, but like I said, I was a train wreck. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't a good officer, if you will, at that point. So there's no question in my mind that I actually did not get any counseling at Fort Campbell. I wasn't offered any counseling at Fort Campbell. It's a weird deal. The thing about especially aviation, right? Pilots die all the time. I lost an air crew in every single unit I was ever assigned to at some point, peacetime. Jennifer and I used to talk about what would happen when I got killed in a plane crash, right? A helicopter crash. It was just, we had a whole funeral plan, right? We never talked about her. It was just to have a spouse get killed, was really shocking. I remember the funeral, the chapel was overflowing with people. General Petraeus was there as a young colonel. But no, it just wasn't normal. And again, in the 90s, what did we do? We dust ourselves off. We went back to work. We didn't talk about PTSD. We didn't talk about grief. Officers keep working. I was a tough guy ranger, I thought that was the answer and now, of course, what do I deal with now 20 years later?
Yeah, well, I mean, it always comes up. It's inevitable.
It comes up. There's no escaping it.
And the problem is you don't know when and where it boils over. And how you react to it and how well you're prepared for it sort of dictates the actions in those moments.
I've got this great – I'm involved with a really cool lady right now. She's also a widow. And she says it really best all the time. She says, nobody gets off scot-free.
100%.
Nobody gets out of this life scot-free. And people like us, it's interesting being involved with somebody who's happened to be widows herself. Is neither of us, you have to raise your kids, you have to go on, but none of us get off without some scuff marks. And I definitely got my scuff marks, and I got more. That's the thing. It's a military career doesn't really give you a break. It's not. There's going to be more death, and that's just how it goes. All
right, so you PCS to Hawaii, and you just mentioned you end up meeting your second wife.
Yep.
There as well. But
kids,
there's a little bit of a sort of, I guess sort of scary coincidence that you both went through something similar, correct?
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's an interesting story. Yeah. It's funny. Yeah. It's one of our very first phone calls we had, Crystal's her name. We're talking about, I used to joke when I was a widower, when you met women, they either got the pouty face, like, oh, or they fleed, right? And neither. I didn't want to be mothered, and I didn't want to chase people off. So I learned to just like let that out up front. Like, hey, by the way, I'm a widow. I'm only 29, but my wife got killed. And sure enough, I was talking to Crystal on the phone. So Jennifer was 7.5 months pregnant; she was killed, and in a car accident. And so I'm talking to Crystal, and I told her the story, and she basically gets all flustered and hangs up. I'm like, all right, so that's the running. So, but she calls me back later. She says, here's the thing. My son Dylan, who's at that time 2, was born because I was in a car accident when I was 7.5 months pregnant. Wow. And they survived. Both of them survived, whereas, of course, Jennifer had not. So it was just a weird sort of, those fateful moments. I mean, fate tends to – there's always a theme in my life of fate intervening. Like I mentioned who I'm dating right now. It's like it just seems like there's the people you need to – fate will hand you the people you need when you need them.
Yeah.
And so we had a wonderful relationship, last 25 years, and we got married very quickly there, just 4 months. I went to Hawaii as a single widower, came back 3 years later as a married father of 4. Go big or don't go. Ended up in Atlanta, and just kind of went on.
And you mentioned that you had a break in service. You decided to get off active duty. Why?
Yeah. Actually, in Atlanta. Yeah. I was at the 13-year mark. A little bit was aviation politics. I was still flying OH-58s, which at that point didn't exist anymore. I had a helicopter I was supposed to be flying that didn't exist, and for some reason the aviation branch couldn't get me a new one. That was frustrating. I had a good career. I was General Franks' special assistant. He had hand selected me to assist and be his guy, PowerPoint and speechwriter. I was a speechwriter basically at 3rd Army headquarters there in Atlanta. So I had a really good career. But we were in Atlanta. My wife at the time got a job as a flight attendant with Delta. We had a pretty good life. And I was frustrated with the Army and the direction it was going at that time. And so I made the decision to get out at 13. General Franks was actually very kind about it. He was like, no, you're doing the right thing. He used to joke. He said, Fred, I'm going to tell you a story. We all get out. Everybody gets out of the Army. Just a matter of when. He goes, and the guys that get out at 13 end up being the bosses of the guys that get out at 30, which is not completely true, but it's an interesting way to put it, right? But here we are. And so I got out, got a job as a project management consultant, and then got slipped into politics the first time in my little hometown of Peachtree City, Georgia, running for mayor of Peachtree City. And it was just, life is funny like that. So one day you're just Joe Blow, and next day you're running for mayor.
It was just interesting. For a guy who finished in the bottom third of his West Point class, you ended up working for 2 very high-profile generals. I mean, there's is that coincidence, luck, or
3, really? Tommy Franks is an interesting story. I don't tell it often. I got to know him pretty well. We were in Egypt, and we were doing Bright Star. If you remember, Bryce was this giant training exercise we used to do every year in Egypt, up in northern Egypt in the desert. 7, 8 countries. It was amazing. I got stuck, just one of those weird deals. I was an operations officer in the G3 shop, and I got stuck with the job to actually put the thing together. So I ended up recruiting, we had a joint staff. I recruited from 7 countries. And then once we got to Egypt, they decided to make me the new chief of a new branch called Future Operations. And so my job was to go between current ops and plans. And it was a new thing. Tommy wanted to do it. It was a new concept and doctrine at the time. So we were one of the first ones to have a future ops cell. And for reasons I can't explain, they put me in charge as a very young major. And so, brand new major. And so I was running that. And it's just a funny story. The G3 comes in and goes, "Hey, General Franks wants you to take on a battlefield tour." I'm like, I'm like, "Sir, I haven't left this trailer. I don't even know where the battlefield is from here. He's like, and he's laughing. I remember, what was his name? Great guy. He was laughing. He goes, "Yeah, enjoy." I'm like, "God damn it!" So get the whole of the Black Hawk crew. Like, all right, here's. I remember sitting in front of the battlefield. It's like a big football field, on a giant scale. And we ended up coming up with these checkpoints, right? And we're okay. Here's where the Marines are. Here's the Egyptians are. We had the whole thing rehearsed and. So sure enough, the next day I find myself on a Black Hawk with me and Jennifer Franks, and in the back of a Black Hawk, and we're flying along the battlefield. And luckily, the pilot's like, "Here we are at checkpoint A." I'm like, "Oh, here you go, sir. Here are the Marines to your left." And then we start talking. And it turns out old Tommy Franks was a field artillery officer and had served in old Loaches, OH-6s in Vietnam as a field artillery. So he was a scout of all things. So we started telling scout war stories, from Desert Storm and from Vietnam, and just kind of hit it off. And we get back, and my boss comes in. He goes, "You did it again." I'm like, "What now?" He's like, "Yeah, Franks wants you to be his assistant when we get back." I'm like, "Come on!" Like, all right. So he liked I guess he liked the way I briefed. Basically, is how it just figured. So I get back, and the next thing you know, I'm the special assistant to a 3-star general, and helping him write his PowerPoints and speeches and traveling around the country with him. So it was really a unique experience. And Franks is a unique character. Obviously, his place in history is unique because of what happened in Iraq and the initial invasion of Afghanistan and all. But he was a good old Texas boy.
Yeah, there's a lot of those running around the Army, good old Texas boys, good old Georgia boys, good old Arkansas boys.
A lot of us. I'm just a kid from Missouri, right? And then, of course, Petraeus and was my professor at West Point. So I had him when I was a cadet, and he taught. It was when he was getting his doctorate, actually. And so he let him teach a little international relations seminar class, just 8 cadets. And we would drink coffee and talk about international relations. And I got to know him pretty intimately, and that's how I know him.
I'm still waiting for me to make it big in the Army, so someone goes, "Hey, just a little kid from New York," because you never hear about the New York guys ever getting to the top.
Nobody, just doing my thing, Well, that was Franks' line, right? I'm a product of the Texas public school system, but even I know that's bullshit.
God, generals always say that. I'm a product of this public school system. For crying out loud.
Franks.
It's one of those go-to lines for high-level Army officers who try to endear themselves to the room of people who just don't want to say anything wrong in front of the individual.
Right, exactly.
All right.
It gets cliche.
Mm-hmm. So you're running for mayor. By the way, I know 9/11 happens while you're running, but what happens as far as the election is concerned?
So I had just filed. I was running, and I got mobilized. I was a reservist at Third Army, or actually Forces Command. And it's funny because nobody knew who I was in that reserve unit. I kind of kept a low profile, and I got mobilized that day. I got called, so I hadn't done my annual training because I was running for mayor all summer. And here it is September 11th, the end of the fiscal year. So the first thing I did was call every asshole who hadn't done his AT because we weren't sure how long it was going to last. So I got called that night saying, "Hey, dude, you haven't done AT. You're up." I'm like, "Shit. All right." So put my uniform on the next day. It's September 12th. I'm in the operations center. First day, I'm literally the guy just answering the phone, right? Like when the other guy went to the bathroom, I'd answer the phone. And then by the end of the first day, one of my old generals walks in, right? Said General Kelly. He was my brigade commander in Hawaii. And he comes wandering in, and he's like, "Fred Wellman." I'm like, "Hey, sir." He goes, "God damn it. Hey, do you guys know who he is?" Like, "No, they don't. Let's not talk about it." He's like, "Yeah, he wrote these plans. He was future ops. He's the Third Army, man. He should be running. He should be in plans." Like, "Sir, stop talking." And no shit. Next day I come in, I'm in charge of the entire Crisis Action Center. And the third day I got put in a vault. writing all the, literally in like 3 days, I went from just being Joe answering the phone to work in the vault, and oh, by the way, here's your 2-year orders. I'm like, shit. And so I sat down with the wife at the time, and to her credit, she was like, "Look, obviously there's going to be a war." Actually, she said on 9/11, she goes, there's going to be a war. I was like, "Yeah, we knew it was Bin Laden. I knew I did nothing but Middle East stuff the last 6 years of my career." She's like, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I want to fight." She's like, "Well, then you go fight." And so I actually said, "All right, I'll take the orders and I'll volunteer to go after duty." So I actually called up the Army, and so I dropped out of the mayor's race. I had to drop out at that point. I was working double shifts, and I had no time to run. So I dropped out of the mayor's race in early September and put the uniform on full time. And 6 months later, I'm at Fort Rucker getting a Black Hawk transition.
When you realize that you're going back to combat, is there any thought at any point in time of your previous combat experience and what had happened?
There was actually an obsession. Honestly, I was obsessed. After what happened with Hal and Mike, I was real fortunate in that. So I am in the 101st Airborne, which is, it's the 101st. They're a great unit.
Right.
I mean, and the 6th, the 101st, the Black Hawk Battalion. So I had a good fortune that one of my Desert Storm commanders or staff officers was the commander. And so the way that was organized back then, you had 3 Apache battalions and you had the cavalry squadron in the 101st Aviation Brigade, and then 1 Black Hawk Battalion, the 6th Bat, which is like the general support guys. And I also had the Pathfinder Company in there. It was like the cobbled together battalion, right? You had assault battalions in the other 159th Brigade, which did air assault. But my battalion was like every little weird shit, from rescuing down pilots to inserting the Black Hawk or the Pathfinders to driving the general. I had the general's aircraft, as a matter of fact. So we were a weird unit, and Petraeus was the division commander, which was awkward at first when my boss found that I knew him. and so here we're going into Iraq. I had a battalion commander, was a great guy, a very nice guy. And situational leadership, right? In situational leadership, you can't have 2 nice guys at the head of the battalion, right? So Chuck got to be the nice guy, and I had to be the flaming prick, right? But I went into that invasion saying, look, I'm not doing this again. I'm not burying more men. I'm going to do whatever it takes to keep these men and women, by the way, alive. So as we prepared, I was ruthless in our training. We had enough notice to do some training. I had to write some SOPs and how to down pilot mission. I was ruthless. We had I actually took one company out of the rotation for that mission because the company commander refused to follow my SOP. I said, great, then you're not going to do the mission. Have a nice day. It was just, I admit freely that if you probably talk to people from that time, they're going to tell you what a dick I was. And I wear that with pride. It's like, but you know what? Every single one of those guys came on. We didn't lose a single soldier from 6th to 101st during OIF1. And I'm really proud of that because I think we were highly trained and we were ready for the mission.
One of the things you did that was controversial was you moved the co-pilot out of the co-pilot seat, right? And that was met with a lot of consternation. Now,
well, the mission commander,
right? So it's essentially taking for people on a convoy, taking the truck commander and make him sit in the back seat. So all he's staring at is the back of the head of somebody in front of him.
We had a jump seat so you could see the maps.
Sure, but I guess it's one of those things where the seat generally gives you what you feel is the best view of the battle space in front of you, right? And so putting them in a, for lack of a better term, a subjugated seat changes their position, changes their role, and guys and gals in general feel like they're losing some sort of command authority.
And a young captain, I get it. And but to take a young Black Hawk company commander, a captain who has never run an air assault because he's a general support company commander, then give him 3 aircraft with seats out. You've got about 18 dudes per aircraft. Okay, that's a lot of folks. We gave them Apaches, so they also had a team of Apaches, 2 to 3 Apaches with them, in a flight, so 5, going in night vision goggles across FLOT, deep in enemy territory where somebody's been shot down. Flying the aircraft should not be his priority. Commanding the mission. Oh, by the way, he's also coordinating with division. He's coordinating with Corps. He's coordinating with the downed pilot. He's coordinating with Air Force, right? And then you want to say, oh, also I want you to fly the fuck out of the helicopter. It just is. And that's literally how Mike got killed, in my opinion. Nobody was flying aircraft. You get killed in a helicopter when nobody's flying it, right? Makes sense. So I was willing to be, and this was doctrine, by the way. The funny thing about this whole story is I was adhering to doctrine. But I was getting resistance from my crews. And I get it. I was that young captain once. I get it. But if you want to do a mission where your mission is to go in very dangerous territory, holding the stick and then running a multi-aircraft mission at the same time can be a lot for a young man.
Looking back, any sort of regrets the way you handled things?
Not one. Not a single one. Should I have been a nicer guy? Maybe. I don't know. But in the end, every single soldier came home. We had a great SOP that ended up being the gold standard. And what is the price of what I think if as a leader in combat, your mission is to do the mission and bring everybody home. We did our mission in spades and everybody came home. So no, it is what it is. We did the work. And the funny thing is halfway through the tour, the battalion commander changed out to a guy who was not as much of a nice guy, and I got switched to being the nice guy. So then I'm building the restaurant and morale, barbecues, So you do what you got to do in leadership and combat. But we did what we did.
No, so you had multiple tours during the War on Terror to Iraq, all of them. Can you compare them? I mean, I went to Iraq in 2005 and 2006, and then I went back for the closeout in 2011, and I see I almost see 2 different wars. so to speak, in that time frame?
Yeah. My wars are dramatically different because the first one, of course, I was an aviator at the troop level. We were the founding fathers of Q West Air Base in northern Iraq. I was one of the first guys there. Tactical. I did civil affairs, helping local Iraqis, build schools. We built schools.
Hearts and minds, baby. Hearts and minds.
Yeah. So we did a lot of that, and I loved it. But then because of that, I ended up on TV. Again, I was a media savvy guy because I'd run for office. So Petraeus figured out that he could throw me on TV, and the story we were doing with building schools and clinics was a good story for what his goal was, which was that showing the world that we were rebuilding Iraq and we were rebuilding the economy. So Petraeus just started sending media to my gate at QS. He said, "Hey, BBC's coming, take them out to your village." Like, okay. and so one day, it was a funny story. I was really fortunate to know a wonderful person named Kira Phillips, who's a CNN anchor. I think she's now at Fox. Just a lovely human being. And Kira did an interview with my family on July 4th because of my Atlanta connection, right, when I run for mayor. And I did just regular hits there. So one day I told Kira a story about meeting some Iraqi kids and giving them a hug because I'm a good storyteller. And she breaks down in tears on camera. And it made news that I made the anchor cry. And so Petraeus emails "God damn it, that made me cry. You should be a PAO." And so, yada, 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 I become a public affairs officer. I mean, it made sense. At that point, my aviation career was over. I'd had that break in service. I wasn't going to be a battalion commander or a brigade commander. That was pretty much my fate at that point. So, at least it's a usable job skill. So I came back and ended up being the 101st Airborne's PAO. And then I deployed to Iraq as a public affairs officer. So now I end up in Iraq with 18 Corps. Petraeus finds out I'm in country. Actually took a trip up to him to visit our old sector. And he poaches me over to his command. So I ended up being General Petraeus' spokesman at the training command. So I go from, so now I'm training the defense minister. I mean, talk about change. I mean, I went from the,
I mean, I don't know if serendipity is the right word, but for crying out loud, every break of good fortune, you keep running into the right people.
Yeah, I've been lucky. I mean, I had I had every third boss like me. One of them was named Petraeus, and one of them was named Frank. You get lucky sometimes. And Petraeus, I knew him for years. He's an interesting. Obviously, he's a bit of. I mean, then not everyone knew who he was. He was, he wasn't the legend that he is now. But he's always been a very generous boss and a mentor for me over those years. But then, people don't talk about much. Everybody talks about Petraeus, but who replaced Petraeus 6 months into my tour? But Dempsey, who ended up being the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Also,
I mean,
two different people.
Yeah, I got a chance to meet him during my second tour. I mean, that's one of those guys that get in the room and you automatically know you're going to be smarter by the time he leaves.
Exactly, and the different leadership style. It was funny. I remember being in the command when it was leaving and Dempsey was coming in, and one of my peers said, "What do you think is going to be the biggest difference, Fred?" I said, "The biggest difference is Petraeus is old school airborne, 82nd, 101st. You jump in and you figure it out." So we used to say our motto at Mid-Sticky, building Iraqis, was we were building the aircraft in flight under fire. Right? Dempsey's a tanker. Okay, I said, a tanker, an armor officer, doesn't leave the motor pool without knowing where his next tank of gas is. Okay, because the battle's over when they run out of gas. So we're going to go from kind of make it up as you go to you better have a damn plan. And sure, that was dramatically what had happened. And that's what made also Dempsey such a unique leader. Is he's very methodical. While he thinks quickly on his feet, his mind is very, he is constantly seeing second, third, fourth order effects from decisions that are made. And it made me a better communicator from learning from him and working with him, frankly.
I hate to kind of, skip over those deployments and what happened, but
I know we're talking for a while.
I'm just kind of curious, when do you get to a point where you realize all the crap that you have been through is starting to bubble up to the surface?
So I get out. I did 20 years and actually third tour. So, okay, actually Harvard. So I started having real problems when I was at Harvard. Halfway through my time at Harvard, I was struggling with my mental health. I had been battling suicidal ideations for years, keeping it quiet. Suicide was sort of my friend, if you will, my warm blanket that was always in the back of my mind at all times, which I found out later wasn't normal. I got to a point during my time halfway through Harvard where I was really coming apart the string, which was between my second and third tours, 2006. And the first wife, or my second wife, sorry, Crystal, was like, "Hey, look, here's the deal, man. If you don't see a counselor today, we won't be here when you get home." Okay. So I went and saw a counselor at the student clinic. It was great. This hippie chick who, helped me kind of work through discovery of what was going on. And the funny thing about it was for years we skipped to the surface. We dealt with the stress. We dealt with my depression. Like here, when you get depressed, do this. But no one ever thought to go deep into. And back then we didn't think about enough. Could it be PTSD? Because I didn't think I had PTSD. How could I possibly have PTSD? Nobody blew me up. I barely got shot at. I mean, I didn't flying, but nothing like truly that would be a traumatic experience for the most part. But what we found out, of course, was death. The wife got killed. The men got killed. My doctor that I worked, my sheikh, got murdered in the clinic I built for him in 2012. My interpreter, who I was very, very close to like a brother, was beheaded on camera right after I left Iraq in 2004. I'd had everybody that worked with me, every Iraqi that worked with me was murdered by 2012. And so that all piled up. But again, I didn't see any of that. I saw myself, I'll get depressed. I saw myself doing inappropriate behavior for a good man. And so I kind of muddled through Harvard. I did better with my depression. I went back to Iraq in 2008 and it just came apart at the seams. I don't tell the story often, but I actually came back my third Iraq tour early. I was redeployed early because I had suicidal ideations, and my chief of staff said, what do you want to do? My wife was sick of it. I came home early. So I came home. I actually retired from the Army in many ways, probably because of my mental health issues. And then, of course, what do? I get a job and I bury him. And then about, I would say 3 years ago, pretty much everything came to a head. My wife, again, we were breaking up. We ended up getting divorced, unfortunately. She had been putting up with me and my suicidal ideations and kind of keeping that secret, covering up the secret. I was covering up my survivor's guilt by being an overachiever, which is a classic symptom of survivor's guilt. You find that survivor's guilt guys tend to like overachieve to show that they belong. I'm going to
validates their self-worth.
Right, exactly. It's there's a great study just came out not 6 months ago about just that, how overachievement and those kind of things are classic symptoms of survivor's guilt.
And what makes it worse is that the constant overachieving doesn't really, satiate that desire to replace the loss. And so you end up chase this thing that you can never catch. And ultimately you get back to the point where I'm still not good enough, right?
It's not good enough. There's a great story. I don't know if you know Jason, you ever heard of Jason Kander? So he ran for office in Missouri. He's from Kansas City. He was famous because he did one of his campaign commercials. He assembled and disassembled an M4 blindfolded.
Wow.
He's a Democrat politician. But Jason was running for mayor of Kansas City last summer, a year and a half ago, and dropped out of the mayor's race because he admitted he had PTSD. And Jason wrote a wonderful blog or a post with his wife about PTSD, and that was it, man. He talked about how I was just doing all these things to make myself feel better, and it never worked. It was never good enough. And I was already a year and a half into my treatment at that point. And then I did this thing called EMDR because it's a trauma-focused therapy, and it worked for me. It worked, but because the theme was the same, right? People die, you go back to work. People die, you go back to work. I had a string of them, a whole lifetime of both military and civilian death associated with my life.
Are you at a place now where, for lack of a better term, you're done unpacking everything? Now it's just a matter of organizing it and figuring out where to put it? Or are you still
I'm in a great place. Yeah, no, the therapy. So I did about a year of talk therapy and group therapy type stuff to deal with, because I had to deal with what I was using to cover up the scars first. So the thing about PTSD is you get really good at self-medicating, right? And my self-medications were, not great. And so I had to unpack those. And then I actually talked about I was actually at a conference in Atlanta with one of my favorite nonprofits, America's Worst Partnership. And one of my clients is a great guy named Major General Mark Graham, whose story is horrible. He lost one son to combat and one son to suicide. And so General Graham now runs an organization called Vets for Warriors. And he was on stage with a guy named Frank Larkin, who ended up, ironically, the father of Ryan Larkin, who was the hospital I served at recently, was named after, who also committed suicide, a Navy SEAL. And these two men were up there on stage, and I was listening to them talk, and I realized at that moment that suicide could not be my choice anymore, because what it would do to my family, what it would do to my daughters, my youngest daughter, what it would do to my son, even my wife at that point. We were still married. And I remember going into the bathroom and having like this weird panic attack like I hadn't had since 2004 when I first got back from Iraq. And I was freaked out. And I got back and I told my wife then, and who freaked out, and she went to the therapist, and she's like, this guy's freaking out, man. He's angry. Because I was pissed. I was pissed that I couldn't do that anymore, that option wasn't on the table. He's like, great, now we can treat your PTSD because we're there. And so then I did the EMDR. after a year and a half of preparation, and it was very effective for me. And so the thing about EMDR when it works is the further you get away from it, the better you are. Once those things are out, once you've processed those PTSD memories, the ability, like I used to be able to go, I could have walked you through every single minute of the day Jen died, or every single minute of the night Mike. Now you can see it's actually a little bit hard to remember some of it, which somebody had warned me that would happen because those memories are no longer raw. They've been processed into regular long-term memory. It's just something that happened at this point. And so I'm a huge fan of EMDR. It's tough. It's a trauma therapy. You got to talk about what happened. But for me, it's just been a year. Now it's been a year and a half, and I tell you, man, I'm in a very good place. I have no regrets, and now I'm in the mode of trying to help others.
Right? Do you think, just hypothetically speaking, you come across a veteran or someone who's a soldier? Are you at a point where you feel like you can spot the people who are packing stuff?
100%. Look, let's look at some of the things we've seen. Here's what worries me is, look at me. You can't see me, but I'm 54-year-old. I'm gray-haired. I retired as lieutenant colonel. My peers from my year group are 3 stars now, right? And look how many guys. I mean, have you seen all the seniors get fired? We've had 3-star generals lose their jobs in the last couple of years, right? I know for a fact one of them. I won't name him because I don't want to shame him, but he was a 3-star commander and just was just kicked out one day. Well, I know for a fact he served with me in Iraq. And I know he lost like a dozen men his very first tour in Mosul, and then he lost another dozen when he was brigade commander. This guy lost a lot of soldiers, and then when he gets to a 3-star, his wife leaves him, and then all of a sudden he's relieved of command very surreptitiously. Okay, there's something going on there, right? You see it all the time. I have peers who are retired lieutenant colonels. I have one who his family just broke up. He refused to get treatment. I don't have any problems with, dude. You're doing all these behaviors that I did, or it's. You have a problem. Nah. Okay. So I do see, because I think the Army breeds, especially in senior officers, that you got to be fine, right? What did I tell you earlier? Stuff happens and the leader leads. You get back to leading. And I think there's a stigma of accepting that maybe all these men who have died on your watch will take a chip out of you,
Well, I say it on the podcast, and it's funny because I'll go through a PHA coming up, a physical health assessment for those civilians listening. And part of that is the mental, health of it whole thing. You sit down with a provider and they ask you all the same questions. Have you thought about hurting yourself? Have you thought about this, hurting anybody else? Are you depressed? And lo and behold, every single time I lie right to their face and tell them the answer that they want to hear, because I'm not about to jeopardize the rest of my career. I still want to serve. I still want to run this race for as long as they'll allow me to run it. And I know that we're better at it now as an organization. The military is about accepting PTSD, but still, when you get to the top of the pyramid, there's very little room for error.
Right. And I lost my clearance.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, in 2007, and at Harvard, I went to mental health. And I went to go get my top secret renewed. I was supposed to be part of the surge. I was going to work directly with General Petraeus during the surge as soon as I graduated from Harvard. And when I had to get my top secret renewed, I told them I had gotten treatment for my PTSD. And the little guy in sneakers at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, rejected my clearance completely. And I got assigned to the Pentagon, and the lady at the Pentagon gave it back. But they literally called. I didn't deploy for the surge because I lost my clearance because I admitted to getting So now that was 2007. I'd like to think it's better, but
it is better. But
I can say with my own experience, it is true. They may, I know it's a lot better than it was. But again, you're right. When you get to that top of that pyramid, imagine being a 3-star, and you're dealing with. We had an admiral commit suicide. Just remember, an admiral committed suicide. Okay, there's a lot going on. We're losing senior officers after 18 years of war. So for me, I've been very open. It's been used against me because, as we talked about a little bit, you want me to talk politics, but I am a political guy. I'm very involved in progressive politics, which is a rare thing in the veteran community. I get that. My openness has been used against me. Just recently, there's a person who was mad at me about something I said, who knows? and they've been going around the internet saying, oh, his PTSD is just his brand. He's just doing it for branding. It's like, no. For me, it's about every time I tell my story, and hopefully somebody on your podcast is listening, is going to go, well, shit, if this old coot who was a CEO of a company for 10 years as well, if he can admit it and get help, then I can. And now I was really gratified. I did a video for the VA recently, and I posted to my personal social media channels, and I had 3 separate people message me or call me. One guy called me while I was in New York and said, I see me in you. Like, yeah. And they all got, so 3 people told me they were getting treatment because of my experience. And that's worth it.
Exactly. And that's one of the things we hope to achieve
Right.
on this podcast, is that ability to not only tell a story that not many people have heard, but also to allow somebody to say, hey, there's somebody out there just like me.
Exactly.
Because there's so many people in the military who have plowed the same turf, right? And they've gone through the same things. They just don't know who they are because they can't talk about it with the ones that they did it with because they don't want to be. But if it's somebody else, they can reach out to a stranger and go, I can relate. I can sympathize. And there's a connection that we can draw together. So I think that is, highlights sort of the biggest point of being able to share your stories, that somebody can connect with it on some
Somebody's
level.
going to connect.
Yeah.
Right. And mental health's like physical health. I joke all the time with, Petraeus is in his 60s now. He's still running FN marathons. I'm 54. I couldn't run. I had arthritis when I was 38. Right. Same life, same military career. Right. When I was a leg ranger, bro. I was an aviator. But I could not keep up with Petraeus running because my body gave out on me when his did. Why? I don't know. Different bodies. Brain's the same way. Mm-hmm. Sure, my experience is unique. And that's why I denied that I had PTSD for so long. It's like I couldn't possibly have it because this guy got blown up. I know this guy with missing 2 legs. He doesn't have PTSD. How could I possibly have it? Because dudes I commanded died. Right. Or my wife was killed getting our fucking answer machine fixed for all goddamn reasons, right? But it is, and the brain is the brain, and those traumatic events piled up for me in a way that ended up being very, very destructive, and could have destroyed my life, and may yet. You never know. Like I said, I wasn't a great person for a long time.
Well, the thing about PTSD is, much like alcoholism or any other disease, you never really heal. Yeah. You just learn to manage it and live with it. Yeah. So, from that standpoint,
although I gotta tell you, man, I do venture out on a limb every now and then and say I'm healed. For me, the treatment worked extremely well. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I got to tell you, man, for me, the suicidal stuff is just gone. I mean, it's just gone. It never comes back. I'm in the middle of a really tough time right now. It'll come out soon.
Right.
But the pandemic wasn't good to me in my company, and it's touch and go. It may not survive, unfortunately. And but here I am still kind of laughing and able to find joy in life and enjoy it. Because that PTSD, man, I'll tell you, it's an anchor on everything.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And again, sometimes it's heavier than others to carry around. Yeah, but let's get to your company, Scout Comms. Sure. You founded it. How, when, and why? What was the premise?
Scout Comms and the work I do today, even outside of Scout Comms, was a simple thing. I got out of the Army, I had a job for about a year. It wasn't a great fit. And I was looking for a new job in 2010. And as I interviewed all these big public relations firms and other lobbying firms in D.C., there wasn't any veterans. I was the only veteran in the room consistently. And that's the nature of the agency world. There's a lot of reasons for it, good and bad. So I actually was in an interview with a guy, and he was an Israeli Air Force veteran. And he's like, dude, we're kind of dorking around, why'd you start your own company? I'm like, man, I was in the Army for 22 years. I was in a not great company for a year. I don't know what right looks like to start a company. He says, Fred, let me tell you something. None of us know what the fuck we're doing. You're a smart guy. You'll figure it out. You make mistakes. I'm like, okay. So I drove home down I-95 and got the idea of the name. I was a scout, and then I did comms, Scout Comms. It was available on every social media channel. I'm a very dangerous driver, by the way. And I came home. I told the wife at the time. I said, hey, I think I'm going to start my own company because the phone's not ringing. Nobody's going to hire us. It's been 30 days. She's like, great, go for it. And so I started Scout Comms in my basement with the idea of being the expert for other agencies. I would be that guy who understands the nature of the military life. And that's what we did. I was very fortunate. I got calls right away. 4 months into this adventure, I got a call from an agency in New York, and their client was going to do veterans housing as their focus. And they want to have a veteran. And this guy's agency was all about like green housing. And so I said, great, who's your client? He's like, the Home Depot. I said, I've heard of them. Yeah, hardware store, right? And the Home Depot Foundation at that time was donating $30 million over 3 years to veterans causes. And brought me in. I did a proposal overnight, was working on Monday. I've been with them ever since, 9.5 years. Now they've donated over $300 million to veterans housing. And that became the story of Scout Comms in many ways. We became that agency people called when they wanted to make a difference in the veterans community. They want to get it right. They want to say the right words. They want to impact it. They didn't want to just work with the guys writing cardboard checks. They actually wanted to make a difference, impact giving. And we became partners. And the Home Depot partnership is a perfect example of how, we connected them with Team Rubicon. They've been a big funder of Team Rubicon for many years. We connected the Student Veterans of America. It's just been a really great arc. And that's where the firm is. So the firm became, I'm proud to say, one of the top firms in the country serving the veteran communities and both for-profit companies and nonprofits as well. But it's been a journey. It's been a journey.
Pretty amazing. I do want to take the turn with you to politics because, as you said, you ran for mayor. You're very involved.
I am.
But and again, in fairness to our audience, most of the people that we have on that have some sort of political affiliation are on the right-wing side of things. They're on the conservative side of things.
The nature of our business.
You happen to fall on the other side of it, which I find very interesting. Now, in the cesspool that is Twitter, that some of us have to live on for our jobs, the one thing I will say is this, the most intelligent discourse I usually have on Twitter when it comes to political or world events or whatever is with fellow veterans, because it doesn't matter if we disagree. We understand a common ground and how to treat each other. Those sort of, for lack of a better term, those Army values always sort of shine through that, hey, it doesn't matter, man. We're still brothers in arms. Even if we disagree politically on what the world's supposed to look like, we understand that we're all fighting for a common good. How we get there is, again, that's that old military out-of-the-box thinking. You can get there one way, I can get there another, but the results we both want are the same. But do you find yourself in a position where other military folks have sort of ostracized you a little bit? Do you get pushback from other military folks? I'm just curious. I mean, I don't mean it in a negative way. I just,
No, it's true. It's funny. It's just, I just had an incident with a person who was very big mad at me. Very much, actually. I've been, in many ways, I've found myself on the outside of some of my old circles from West Point, other places, because I've taken a stance. Obviously, I'm not shy. I'm not a big fan of the current president, and I've made that clear since before he was elected. And I've always approached my political values and my military values as my military values, as my the duty, honor, country thing from West Point. I was raised by a Marine from Massachusetts. My family, I'm very blessed. We only found out before my dad passed, thankfully, that we go back always 1640. My dad's side of the family was one of the originals. We had a Minuteman that served during Lexington and Concord. And one of my ancestors actually fought at Trenton. He was actually across the Delaware with Washington.
That is insanity.
Right? So we've got a long history in this country of the values that make this country good, and that's what I stick to. And unfortunately, I've found that I'm in my sense that this current administration doesn't necessarily meet those values the way I would have. And so I found myself more and more on the political left. And I was a conservative for my entire life. I was Republican lifelong. I ran as Republican.
Oh, really?
It was nonpartisan, but I was Republican. Everybody in that town was. Up until, frankly, I voted Republican in the 2016 primary. So it just something changed, and I found myself in a different set of values. And the more I did the research, and a lot of that had to do with being a CEO. Is like one of my employees not being able to get health care. I see, because I couldn't afford to buy health care for my company at that time. Those kind of weird things, you go, God, there's more to it. And frankly, my darn kids, I have 4 kids who are really hardcore lefties. And they dragged me into it, but again, there has been disappointment. I'm not gonna lie to you, man. It's like there's some of the harshest critics and the most really horrible things that have been said about me have been from our fellow veterans. You're just a pogue. You're a pogue. You're a paser. I've been called a traitor. I've been called.
That's ridiculous.
I mean, some of the most heinous things. And I won't mention. There's one famous person who likes to drag me a lot. He hate follows me and likes to stick his 1 million followers after me every now and then. And I'll get phones. Dude, I got a phone call. I came home last Saturday for a bike ride, feeling very zen. And some guy called me, got my phone number off my website, which is no longer there, by the way, and called me to cuss me out. A veteran. He goes, wait, because I'd blocked him that day because he was always saying really nasty shit to me. I finally just blocked him. He goes, wow, way to treat a fellow veteran. I'm like, dude, I blocked you on Twitter. Are you really calling me? You decided to go to work to call me at home to cuss me out. It's like, dude, it's Twitter. It's not real world. What is wrong with you?
And that's the other part of it that people fail to realize. But again, I've learned when it comes to discussions with people on Twitter, especially military people, the thing that irritates me the most is, people claim that I use my service as a shield, which I think is crap.
Right.
Because it's part of who I am. It's no more than me.
It shaped your values,
right?
It shaped your values.
It's no more than me being 100% Italian as far as part of who I am and the way I was raised and how I grew up and everything else. I mean, so I think that's a silly premise. But I also, it's troubling that people who learn these military values can't take a step back and have a conversation with somebody who, again, wore a similar or same uniform and be able to at least try to achieve some understanding together, because at its core, that's leadership, right? And
Right.
what troubles me about where we are, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, whether it's the president or the Speaker of the House, I don't see any leadership. And that bothers me.
Right.
So when I run for office, I'm running on one platform: leadership. Period.
And that's why I love seeing like guys like Ruben Gallegos. If you know Ruben, he's former Marine. He's a Lance Corporal, for God's sake, and he's out of Arizona, and he's a terrific leader. He's aggressive. He's fair. He's a leader. He's taking charge. I love this generation, this younger generation of guys, especially veterans. Or Seth Moulton's actually Seth and I served in Iraq together. I've known Seth.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Seth and I were on staff with Petraeus together. I've known Seth since he was a young Marine captain. So so there is hope, and there's great frustration. I do believe we have to look at what our values are as a nation. And this current, I think this latest fight. I mean, the Confederates' base names is a perfect example. It's like, that's not political. It's the way I put it is very simple. Like, let's just think about it first. Let's put yourself in someone else's shoes for a second. We're saying to black soldiers that you need to serve at a base that was named to actually honor those who fought to keep you in chains. It's not about renaming it or who it should be named after. The point is, should we in the first place name a post after men, one of them being one of the founders of the KKK, another one who executed black prisoners after Petersburg, Pickett and Benning. It's like, this isn't political.
Yeah, I can even go simpler than that, Fred. I mean, Fort Hood is named after a general who lost every engagement he was in.
Good generals. That's right.
He's a loser.
They're not even good generals. That's why I like a lot. It's like Pickett. Pickett's charge was the high point of the Confederate, cause. He was forced out. He fled to Canada after the war. You've got Hood, Bragg, Fort Bragg, the great Bragg. Bragg was drummed out of the Confederate Army. He was forced to retire in 1863.
But you know what the funny part too is? The funny part too about that is there's a weird sense of who history belongs to, right? Like, I don't know where people think that history belongs to them. The only history that belongs to you is your family history, because that is directly tied to your name. That history that people are fighting so hard to, quote, preserve, which is a silly idea, because with the internet now, history never gets erased. Oh, we're erasing history. You can't erase history.
We're not erasing history.
You're never going to tell the history of America without the Civil War, without slavery, period. It doesn't matter whether there's a statue or a base or not. So it's just funny what people think as belongs to them personally as history. That's the country's history. That is America's history. And you as an individual, even though you're an American citizen, don't get to decide what that history is and how it should be presented to the people.
And how it should be honored. I mean, and that's my point, is when you have a Confederate monument outside a courthouse or here at Monument, I mean, there's actually history that shows that Monument Avenue in Richmond, as gorgeous as those statues are, they were literally built to sell houses in a segregated neighborhood. It literally was a sales tech. It's like having the pretty water fountain in front of your subdivision. It's like, maybe we shouldn't honor those guys. Let's put them in the museum.
I have a friend, who I've known for 20 years. We were college classmates together. And as a black man, he told me this. He said, look, if those statues and things were built right after the war had ended as a monument to them,
perhaps,
it would be different. But they were built after 1900 in a Jim Crow era as a big middle finger, to remind you that, hey, this is still where you live. And to that end, I thought it was such a lucid point. Like I would say to a sports analogy, like I would say to Falcons fans, if because I live here in Atlanta, if the Patriots took out a billboard that said 28-3 on it and posted it in the middle of Atlanta, how would you feel? It's giving you a big middle finger about the Super Bowl lead that you blew. So it's like, you wouldn't be happy about that either. It's that simple of a premise. They were built to honor those, quote, generals, and I air quote honor, but it was also, there was an underlying reason of when they were built and why they were built, and it's sort of a big, hey, bleep you.
And that's exactly it. And by the way, the thing about guys that you and I look like you and I went to Bragg. I served at Benning. I mean, I never thought twice about who that was, but that's because we had the luxury of not having to.
Yeah.
We you got to remember when I'm 54. People my age literally have grandparents or great grandparents who were slaves. Mm-hmm. Think about that for a second. Someone our age, my age, probably has a great grandparent, could very well have been a slave, and so it's a very real history to people who don't look like us. And so I think I do actually hate the term white privilege, but it is something that we don't have to think about. I've never had to worry about dying when a cop pulled me over. I never had to worry about being profiled because I'm an old white guy. I'm chubby. I look so non-threatening. You know what I mean? And so for me, I've been very blessed with, especially West Point classmates, like a guy named Ron Steptoe and a number of others who've taken me under their arms, said, look, here's a perspective for you, Fred, as a man who's had great success. I went to West Point. I went to Harvard. You can't have more white privilege than my life if you really want to be honest about it. Now I'm a flaming liberal. I'm the classic one, right? Mm-hmm. But I was very fortunate to have people who said, let me put you in somebody else's shoes for a minute and see what's going on here. This is what this says to me. Or this is, the most heart-rending, I get emotional, is a friend of mine who's got a black son and she's white, and having to talk to him about how to dress and how to walk and how to talk to police because they know people have gotten shot. It's like, I've never had to have that conversation with my son about how he should not wear a hoodie when he goes out.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think for I actually had a good conservative friend. She was actually in my first wedding and is a congressional staffer for a conservative Republican now. And she's like, dude, what happened to you?
What happened to you?
What happened to you? How'd you, because he's a flaming liberal? I'm like, well, let me tell you, because I hate the term woke, but I did wake up to, like, there's a perspective out there that isn't mine. I grew up in a subdivision on a golf course. Okay. And my dad was a GI Bill guy from World War II. I had I had a life of privilege that led me to this. And then my eyes have been wrenched open to the people who don't have that. And I think I was asked to speak at an HBCU, a historically black college, at a diversity conference. And I remember this professor that called me. I remember I was talking to him and I said, he's like, why don't you be the keynote? I'm like, that's fine. I was like, Stevie. And he goes, Fred, I know you're going to say you're white. I said, okay, you've seen my LinkedIn text here. I am a white guy. Because Frederick is also often a black name. Frederick Douglass, He goes, no, I want you here because veterans issues are diversity issues, but I want someone else's voice. And I was scared to give this speech. And I called up my classmate, Ron Stepp. I said, Ron, I can't do this. I'm not that guy. He's like, full stop. The old adage, like, there would have been no Civil Rights Act if MLK hadn't had Lyndon Johnson. And his point was, and he still calls me every now and then when I get depressed about things, when I'm getting my ass kicked on Twitter, or I had an article written about me that's not exactly flattering. Ron would remind, he goes, look, the fact is that people of privilege, that nothing will change unless those with privilege help those who don't. And so I've forced myself in very uncomfortable positions. I went to a BLM rally here, and it was very uncomfortable for me because I stick out like a sore thumb. But I'm listening and I'm hearing stories, and it's eye-opening when you say, I never thought of it that way, And so for me, it's become a passion and now with the election getting near, it's become more so. But it is what it is, right? I think when we talk about our values as a nation, I can't believe we're still fighting the fucking Civil War. Yeah. Can we get over this? Can we just let it go? Because when you see what happened with the vagrancy laws and the Jim Crow era laws, the segregation and redlining of housing here in Richmond, where there's a highway where they put I-95 right through Navy Hill, which has been the largest concentration of black residents. That's where they put the highway. So it's these are such historic things that these people remember. The people who were affected by it remember, and people look like you and I didn't have to because we were living in the good neighborhood in the suburbs. So I'm ranting. I apologize.
Listen.
But it's been an eye-opening experience.
Again, part of my draw to you in getting you here was to get the other side and the other perspective. I think it's important that our veterans and our military are the best case and the best example of diversity in this country. We fight hard for that. We're not there yet, but we fight hard for that. And statistically speaking, the military is one of the most integrated and diverse organizations in the world. So,
and it's broken a lot of people out of poverty. It's broken a lot of people out of places. It's a land of opportunity, and it's good.
Let me broach one more topic with you. There's something that's always been personal to me. I don't like how our military has become pawns in a lot of different games, political and otherwise. That's something I am a huge, staunch defender of. And for those who know, I work in sports talk radio on the civilian side, and so nothing irritates me more than when the NFL and Major League Baseball and everybody else want to use us to sell tickets, to sell camouflage uniforms, to generate revenue for them. In the meanwhile, we get nothing. We get nothing out of it. And, the idea that, they're giving back to the community. Look, they put a soldier on the field. Big freaking deal. They put them up in a skybox and let them watch the game. Big freaking deal. You know what they're not doing? What they're not doing is getting veterans more jobs. You know what they're not doing? They're not helping with mental health. They're not helping with the issues that are plaguing veterans and service members across the country, but yet they're still getting six-figure checks from local sponsors for their Salute to Service Week, which, again, drives me incredibly insane.
I had a client. You know who my client was for a while? Nick Francona.
Oh, Nick is yes.
You know Nick, right?
I know Nick very well,
story.
yeah.
Why did Nick get fired? Because Nick said, hey, where's the money for these camouflage hats going?
Yeah, because it's not going. It's not going back to.
We only have one. It's like one veteran working MLB. He goes like, this is all bullshit. That's exactly what Nick has had a battle on for years now. It's like this is that exactly that program that faux patriotism that the performative patriotism, right?
And it's not just it's not just sports. We are very much used in politics the way we shouldn't be. We're a convenient toy for a lot of people in politics. And even at the state level for National Guards, we're a very convenient toy for governors to be able to use and put out there as props on TV. And I don't know how we go about fixing that. I don't know how we go about changing that, because at the end of the day, as an organization, it's they say we do, and there is really no consternation between, and I suppose in theory we could put out the Department of Defense could put out hey, no soldiers are allowed to integrate to be part of sports celebrations or on-field celebration. That they could do that, but then the military looks like a bunch of jerks, right? Because all they want to do is do something nice for you, right?
And what's reasonable and what's recruiting and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
but I think we've also had a history of norms and customs that politicians are kind of recognized. And while we did bump up against every now and then, we've definitely seen that. And that was that whole Lafayette Square incident, and the CJCS actually apologized for his place.
Millie, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's a very trying time, and those norms have slipped. I mean, I was frustrated because Mr. Trump, when they did the July 4th parade, his team had a video out within like half an hour after the parade was over, a campaign commercial. They took an official presidential event with a flyover and troops and turned it into a campaign. And that makes me very uncomfortable. Not that other politicians haven't done it, but it's so much more blatant than it ever has been.
Yeah,
I was a skeptic of the last president when they created joining forces. I was like, oh God, I got to look at my Twitter. God, I probably should delete it all, but I'm positive there's a delete way back there where I'm criticizing joining forces when President Obama set it up. Oh, here it is. They're a military program to make them look good. And then they know what? They actually did a really good thing. And that damn thing lasted 5 years and ended up being a very, very powerful program. I actually hired the lady that ran it, in my company when the administration was over. They actually invited me in. I bring clients the East Wing. We would sit in Mrs. Obama's office, and you know what? They would walk out going, "I'll hire veterans," because the pressure of the office. I mean, she wasn't even there, but just sitting in her office, like I would have clients go, "Yeah, whatever you want, we'll do it." They hosted events on homelessness. The last thing they did in that White House after the election was they hosted an all-day conference on veterans homelessness in the White House, inviting nonprofits and for-profits from across the country. So I think there's the right way to do it and the wrong way. No one's ever been perfect of it. And like you said, I can't see, but I do worry about the politicization of the military. And I've also seen the very troubling, truly very aggressively political operations by serving personnel. And that's been some troubles for me. I think I tweeted about the other day. There's some really especially as a public affairs guy, I see some really disturbing, picking media outlets, specific media outlets. And, it's like we were never allowed to do that in the old days. It's going to be interesting. I think we're facing an interesting time.
We also have to tiptoe as an organization. Right. So what's the old adage we say? We defend democracy. We don't practice it. Right. Like that's how the military is supposed to necessarily. Yeah. But, then you have right now we're in an era, and I'm not calling it snowflake or soft or whatever, but if a soldier wants to practice their First Amendment rights, regardless of what their job is, they're allowed to be able to do that. Now, can they be a representative of the government? No, they can't. So you can't go show up at a protest in uniform per se, unless you have a duty to be there like National Guardsmen do. But, it's a slippery slope we've put ourselves on right now, because we have to balance between the defense of democracy and the ability to be part of it. And there's a very fine line that you get into, and unfortunately, that line is sort of getting smaller or starting to being whittled away.
Yeah, and then of course, let's not even get into us retired guys and our voices. I got lectured by a famous news anchor the other day. It's like I have a voice too. I fought for this country. I'm allowed to have a voice, and maybe a voice you don't want to hear. But times have changed. It's really a unique time in our country, and I do think we face a moment like few I've ever seen in my long life. Of who we are, defining who we are as a nation, defining who the military is as the thing. And I'm glad it went the way it did, because it could have gotten really ugly in DC. I'm glad to see that the military stepped off the brink of just the idea of active duty military. I don't know if you saw, I was very, very vocal about the fact they used a medevac aircraft. The DC Guard used a Lakota with red crosses on it to dust out the crowd. I'm sitting on Twitter seeing a video of an actual medevac, an air ambulance, being used to disperse crowds. And it's like, okay, I thank God. I'm so proud of the Army for investigating it, and I'm hoping that someone will get fired, because it's like it's like loading a SWAT team into an ambulance and driving them into a crowd. It's just like the decisions that went from A to a helicopter pilot, one of my fellow aviators, hovering over a crowd in an air ambulance, trying to dust them out and possibly hurt them, is horrifying. And I hope the Army all sits back. I hope the military as an entity and the National Guard and our politicians take a step back and go, whoa, we really went too far. Okay. I mean, if we use a Red Cross as an offensive effort to disperse, it's like,
literally that's we have Geneva Convention rules against doing that. Yeah. Like we won't do it in combat.
Never do that, right? Yeah. That's the constant refrain I see from people of both political spectrums.
That ends you up in Leavenworth if you do that in combat.
Yeah, right. The rules of engagement I used in combat are tighter than what we're seeing right now occurring in America on our streets, both by military and by police. So I actually am an optimist, which is weird because I'm not by nature, but I am optimistic that a lot of us kind of went, whoa, that was crazy. Like the morning, like old school, the movie, like, like, wow, things got out of hand.
Let me ask one more question here. Does the military do a better job at checking itself than they did in the past?
I can't answer that question. I think so. I think you got to remember, the great thing about our system is we have a system of review. The AAR process. The AAR process is so ingrained, and that's not typical for even after 10 years in business. You and I are so like the 5-paragraph op orders in our brain. We think in 5 paragraphs right now, right? And it's the same way with the after action review process. I think we are better if we do ask ourselves hard questions more than others. Mm-hmm. But sometimes those questions the answers are really ugly, and we don't want to answer them.
And I have said, that when it comes to, as we're sitting here recording this, we're dealing with all these struggles with the police force and everything else and police brutality. The correlation is this: the military generally has gone unchecked by outside sources for decades, because we're the only ones who check ourselves. Politicians don't really check us; they just use us. The same way. Mayors and police chiefs don't really check the police force. They just monitor the numbers and the results, because that's what they're focused on. Oh, we need lower crime, so, we'll get lower crime. They don't really care about how. So police forces generally go unchecked. And the correlation I use to police brutality is the sexual assault in the military that went unchecked for decades, right? And eventually enough of it came out that the military said, okay, full stop. We need to fix this now. And it is a training issue. And when you have 2-star generals sitting in the same room with privates to get the same exact training from the top down, that is a full-on retraining of the force. And the only way that we actively started to cur and slow sexual assault in the military was that sort of, rapid and wild
and oversight
that needed to happen. Now we're getting better. We're not great yet. We're getting a lot better at the way we do it. But I would say that is the exact same way that we have to retrain police forces. It matters that police chiefs, captains, lieutenants, the sergeants are all in the same room with the beat cops doing the same training all over again to understand how to change things. And then after that, that's when you kick it into basic training and at the police academy, because if you start there, there's always going to be a huge lag behind.
Yep. But again, we are a product of America, right? You had that kid 18 years before I get him, right? So the values we bring in, I mean, we're going to have bad acts, we're going to have people make mistakes, and the system that I love about the military, I think is best, is the UCMJ. The fact that we do self-police, which is one of the things that's been criticism of civilian police, is the UCMJ does work. I mean, it's not perfect, and we've got some fixes, but there's a system where we go, okay, that guy's a bad egg. We could train in that. I can't train hate out of his heart. I can do a lot of things. So I like it. And then I also am a big believer going back to that. What you talk about, the sexual assault thing, it's easy to forget also that Elizabeth Warren and a couple other female senators were all up our ass about that. And so in many ways, I'm a big believer in the checks and balances of our government, which hasn't occurred. You said about oversight. Congress kind of walked away from, I mean, when's the last time we had a hearing about Afghanistan? When's the last, the war on terror? It's like no one's overseeing. We're doing whatever we want. And they pass the budget every year. But I would love to see us go back to the days where Congress actually did their job of providing oversight of the executive branch. And the executive branch cooperated in it. And the systems worked. I mean, I think, and that's just, this goes back this isn't just this current administration. You can go back decades for the very beginning of the war on terror, frankly, under previous administrations where Congress just said, hey, you guys got it. We're not generals. Well, that's great, but some generals aren't that smart.
Right.
Maybe we should have some oversight. We built this beautiful Constitution, and it's lasted all these years. One of my biggest talking points in my politics is, God, I just love to see us. If you love the Constitution so much, then let's just use it the way it's supposed to. Let's do all the amendments. Let's do the thing where Congress oversees the executive branch, the judicial branch oversees everybody else. Let's do all that. Let's have all those parts work the way they're supposed to. I get mad when I see the executive branch blowing off hearings. I get mad when Congress doesn't even freaking show up for them. And when you know what I mean? I get mad when judges just rubber stamp bad
Sure,
decisions.
yeah.
I just want to. My dream is an America where the system we created is followed the way it's supposed to. But I'm a dreamer.
Well, listen, Fred. I mean, it's an amazing discussion. I've certainly enjoyed it. Everything that you've went through, and all your education and background have sort of put it all together into a finely tuned machine at this point in your life. We're always constantly trying to get better and always constantly trying to improve. And you can see that, your journey, while it's unique to and specific to you, it's something that other people are going to relate to. And I certainly appreciate all your honesty, all your candor, and a very vivid and lively discussion on the current state of things in America.
That's very kind of you. It's incredibly kind of you, man. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate you letting me tell some stories, and it's been a joy. So thanks, man. I look forward to talking some more sometime.
Fred Wellman, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.